Welcome back to another Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the most recent release from the Big Finish monthly range of 2018. Is of course the second 7th Doctor adventure from the Ace and Mel trilogy of this year, and it is The Dispossessed, written by Mark Morris and directed by Jamie Anderson. The episode features the 7th Doctor as portrayed by Sylvester McCoy, and we do also have the companions Mel, portrayed by Bonnie Langford, and Sophie Aldred, of course, playing Ace. So it is once again rather nice to see this TARDIS team together. Of course, previously last month I did review the Una McCormack episode Red Planet, so I do definitely recommend checking out that review if you're a fan of the 7th Doctor era. In that episode it is very much about kind of time warps and changes in events and times and what happens if you change history and kind of the ripple effect from there onwards. So if that is something that takes your interest, I do definitely recommend checking out that review to kind of start off this review series from the very beginning. However, if you're here for this month's release, of course, of the Dispossessed, this episode is once again a rather intriguing one featuring the 7th Doctor. Ace and Mel travel back to Earth once again, however in a slightly different setting to last time. First off, and as always, in the description below I will leave a link to go and buy this release from the Big Finish website. It's currently out now. You can listen and download the trailer on the Big Finish website. The physical edition is $14.99 and the download version is $12.99. So if you're interested by what I say, you can also check out the synopsis on the website along with the casting details and all of the technical details on there as well. Firstly, taking a look at the cast for this story, starting off with Sylvester McCoy as the 7th Doctor. Much like how I've said in quite a lot of the 7th Doctor reviews over the past 2 years, this version of the 7th Doctor travelling both with Ace and Mel is kind of a little bit of a mixed bag between the original version of the 7th Doctor that we had at the very early half of his era, and then also the slightly darker, more mysterious version that we've seen in the later half. However, a few of the stories do tend to differ in kind of the way that they present the 7th Doctor. This episode is certainly one of those. Mark Morris has kind of portrayed the 7th Doctor to be a little bit more of that light-hearted variation, where he kind of takes a little bit more of a laid-back approach. He's very comedic, and he is less so of that darker self, which to be honest I do tend to like a little bit more. I think that almost throughout this story, especially towards the later half, there is a moment almost near the very climax of this episode where he needs to make a rather large almost speech section, kind of overpowering the monster of this story, and it does seem a little bit comedic and a little bit theatrical. And the odd thing with the 7th Doctor, he is very good at making speeches and presenting speeches. In some of the episodes I've listened to in the past, he can really have some standout moments, but also at the same time you get episodes such as this one where you're meant to have this big massive speech moment. However, it does tend to come over a little bit more of a comedic piece rather than a serious piece, and at the same time I did still like Sylvester McCoy's portrayal. I feel like he's the Doctor that we kind of got to know and love throughout his era. Little small man with his quirky little umbrella that kind of bounces around the situation, almost taking life under his wing and just sort of enjoying the scenario that he's in. Lives by the edge. He does have quite a lot of close moments, especially throughout this story as well, where you don't necessarily think it's the end for him, because of course you know he goes on to have later adventures from this story, but it is a very nice moment where he almost sacrifices himself for the sake of other people that are in the building throughout this story. Companions, we of course have Bonnie Langford, who plays Mel, and as I've said in the majority of Big Finish reviews over the past 2 years that feature Mel in the stories, I feel like I'm gradually sliding away from that TV version of Mel. It's getting to the point where I'm almost forgetting that that character is even the same to the one that appeared alongside the 6th Doctor in the later half of Trial of the Time Lord and then the early half of the 7th Doctor era, because she feels completely different. Big Finish has made her a lot more bearable, she's a lot more independent, she's also a little bit more intelligent as well, but also at the same time she does have a few of those squeamish elements in there as well. There is a few times throughout this story where she is a little bit uncomfortable by the situation, and she is almost a little bit grossed out. I hate to use that word, but hey, that's kind of the only way that I can use to kind of explain the situation she was put into. But I kind of feel that she is just a lot nicer. I like her more in Big Finish, and I feel that Big Finish definitely gave her a lot more justice than the TV show did. So yeah, very good job once again. She's a lot more than the companion that she used to be in the TV form. And then moving on to Sophie Aldred as Ace, kind of for me naturally the iconic 7th Doctor companion. I never really normally have have any criticisms at all with Sophie Aldred's portrayal. I feel like she is a character that I just love throughout the whole TV show. She is fun, she's also quite young. I almost also forget that when she was travelling with the 7th Doctor, I do believe that she would have been around 18 or 19, early 20s, something like that. And in this story, she does feel a little bit immature, I must admit. She feels a little bit excited by the situation and almost like she just wants to go in, like explosions blazing, kind of just blow up everything. And I must admit, in the early half of this episode, I feel like she is a little bit of a caricature of what we've seen in, say, Dragonfire in the early half of her era with the 7th Doctor, where she kind of went around calling the Doctor the Professor and all of that. But I feel like as the story progressed, much like with Mel and much like with the 7th Doctor, Mark Morris kind of got a little bit better at handling the situation and presenting the companions and the Doctor in a little bit of a different way, which is good. I would have been a little bit annoyed if that continued throughout the whole story, as opposed to just in the very beginning. Moving on to the other characters in this story, now it is in fact quite a small cast. We do have Morgan Watkins as Rook, who is a character that I think it would be fair to say is on the fairly lower end of the social hierarchy. He's unemployed, doesn't have a job, he's living on bare minimum pretty much. He's needing to go to food banks in order to survive, and he is currently living in this very rundown area of Manchester. He is living in sort of the poverty-stricken area that has rubble everywhere, fridges on the streets, and kind of just broke down buildings. And this whole episode is essentially set in a high-rise tower building that is sort of got a lot of houses in. I do believe that there were some things that were made in like the 60s or 70s where they needed a lot of accommodation for people. However, they didn't have much space to put them in. It's something of which you do tend to see a lot more of down south, such as into Birmingham, Manchester, and London as well, because they of course have a lot less space than in the upper half of England. And I feel like that this story is a rather claustrophobic one, but Rook especially makes this story rather special. Within his situation, I really was in his shoes and kind of felt like I was experiencing the story along with him. I feel like that Morgan did a very good job of portraying that. In this story, throughout the mid-half, we find there is something wrong with Rook, and it's something that takes him by surprise, and it is nice to have that almost life-threatening disease aspect of real life implemented into Doctor Who, so that is very good. Love interest of Rook, or almost the love interest, the unofficial love interest for this story, is Anna Mitchum's character, who plays Jan. I do believe that she is a little bit younger, and the general sort of context for her character is she is on the run from her ex-boyfriend, who is a little bit violent and threatening as well, and he kind of didn't really treat her very well. So once again, sort of offering that rather a real life aspect into a Doctor Who story, which is very good. And once again, I found Jan quite likeable. Not as likeable as Rook, as we didn't really get to know her as much. She kind of just asked questions all the time. We have Sterling Gallacher, who plays Isabel. Once again, she is the alien for this story, however, not the main alien threat. She isn't the foe or the villain or anything like that. She's kind of somebody who has come to this situation because her planet, in fact, got destroyed by the main enemy of the story, and she's came to seek revenge. Much like the 7th Doctor, at some points in the story, she can feel a little bit over the top. So if you are somebody that doesn't really like over the top characters, then you may not like this episode, because there is quite a few moments that do express that. However, I did find her quite likeable throughout the story. She also had a little bit of a robot sidekick in there as well. Then we also have finally the main villain for this story, who is Nick Ellsworth, who plays Arcalax, who is a rather interesting alien villain, who is basically this character who can either live in a physical entity or a mental entity, and for the majority of the story he is an atmospheric piece who has basically took on the sentient life form of this high-rise tower building, and he is a character that is very sort of powerful. He's very interesting. He can manipulate the building that he is in and make the people on the inside basically feel very weak and powerless. And I feel that Nick did a very good job of portraying the character. He had a few great moments towards the later half of the story with the 7th Doctor. We almost need to have this mental battle to some extent in this almost an afternoon tea scenario, where you have the 7th Doctor in this rather nice soft chair drinking a cup of tea along with Arcalax next to him, kind of this very gentlemanly character, but also at the same time basically he's manipulating the building and using his mind against the Doctor, and then the Doctor's using his mind against Archelax. It's all rather interesting. So now moving on to the narrative of this story, it is a rather unusual episode where I'm actually finding that this is a very easy episode to follow along to. I in fact recommend this episode to a new series fan who is looking for a way to get into the Big Finish main range, because normally with the Big Finish main range stories is that due to them being around 2 hours long, the scripting and narrative is rather complex. You do have a lot of layers to it, a lot of different problems coming in. Just when you think that one problem is fixed, another one will come along, and sometimes the episode is quite hard to follow because there's quite a lot of characters in there as well. This episode reduces the characters, you get used to them. I found myself knowing the names of the main characters pretty much by the end of part 1 in this story, and also at the same time the actual story itself is very nice, very laid back, very easy to listen to. You get along with the characters, but also at the same time there's no wacky moments in there where kind of it throws you off. It kind of gives this one story, this one idea and this one problem, and it runs with it, and at the very end of this story that problem is solved and that is the adventure over. I feel like it's an episode that is rather self-explanatory, and it is nice to have episodes like this in the Big Finish monthly range, because yes, it will be interesting to have complex and experimental episodes literally every single month. However, at the same time, it's nice to have episodes like this that are a lot more relaxed and easy to listen to, that are definitely a lot more welcoming to the new series audience. And I think that the Doctor and the companions definitely support that. As I said, they make the story and narrative very easy to follow due to the way the story is in fact presented, and also due to the fact that the whole episode is pretty much in a tower block. The whole episode is set within the different floors of this tower block and it being manipulated, and we have the Doctor and the companions being separated so they kind of go on their different adventures, and you get introduced to the different characters very slowly as well. So it is a rather nice spoon-fed story, and I think that Mark Morris has basically done a great job of making an entertaining release, but something of which that is also an average Doctor Who story. Fortunately, due to the Doctor being rather charismatic and over the top, and also due to the alien being rather theatrical and very loud in impact, and he has a lot of speeches, he literally says it is now for my victory at the very end or something like that. It is very stereotypical average Doctor Who template, and due to that, some of the aspects of this episode could be seen as rather cringy. For example, due to Archelax basically being this sentient tower block, he is pretty much in control of everything. He can make doors into things that can swing out and hit people. He can break pipes and make them come down from the ceiling and trap people. It's basically a wacky sort of horror house. There's even this moment where elevator doors start opening and closing, and basically the doors end up being a mouth, and the doors end up being teeth, and a tongue kind of ends up reaching out to try and grab the companions. And I think that if that was represented visually within the TV show itself, not only would it probably look rather cringy and bad, but also at the same time I feel like that it is just a light-hearted thing. It would sit with a different style of audience than an average classic story would, such as say the early half of the Big Finish era, or even Red Planets. Red Planets will meet a different audience expectation compared to this episode that is a bit more sci-fi, sort of with a little bit of exile in there, having this character that has been sent off from his own planet, who is this rather unusual mental source of energy, and yeah, he basically feeds on other people, and there's these zombies, and yeah, it's nothing really too big. As I say, it could very easily fit into new series Doctor Who, and I actually also think that the story could be shrunk down into a 45-minute episode and even aired in the 11th Doctor era or the 10th Doctor era. It is very similar, but for that, at the same time, I kind of respect this story for being rather unique in its classic series approach. Music and sound design for this story is also rather good as well, makes it sound rather atmospheric, especially when in the claustrophobic situations, and also when the characters are literally dangling outside the tower block, literally about to plummet to their death. You actually feel like they're outside because of the wind sort of brushing against them. It has been rather nicely designed. The actual music itself has been done by Joe Kramer and also Josh Arakaline or something like that. I do believe that a few of the pieces have been used in other adventures adventures in the past, I am noticing a little bit of repetitiveness when it comes to a few of the compositions. I feel like they've been used before, but that said, Big Finish literally release Doctor Who adventures every single week. They literally cannot be expected to whack out a brand new soundtrack every single week, let alone every single month for a Big Finish main range story. So it may be nice to have a few more sort of 7th Doctor soundtrack compositions used, because some of it you can tell has been used from other stories. That is it overall for The Dispossessed. It is a rather nice relaxing listen, something that you can sit back and enjoy, nothing really too complex and doesn't really throw many wild cards in there, so for that reason it is a rather average story, but at the same time Mark Morris has done a very good job of actually creating an episode that is both enjoyable. Amy Anderson has done a very good job in directing as well to actually make it sound good. And also, just to finish off this review, it is worth noting that in the end of Red Planets there was a little bit of a reference to a story arc, nothing really too big whatsoever, and then in this story there was also a reference at the very end, which I will let you find out if you so wish, but basically giving a minor little sort of contextual thing. This is all meant to be, I do believe, summarised in an upcoming story next month, which is the Quantum Possibility Engine, which does of course feature the return of Dog Bolter, of course an infamous Big Finish villain, and also I do believe a businessman as well. And it'll be interesting to see why Mel has a little bit of a connection to that character, but I guess we'll have to wait until then to find out what happens in that story. So thank you very much for watching this review. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any questions about The Dispossessed, then please do leave them in the description below, and I will reply to them at some point in the near future. I guess I'll see you all in more Doctor Who reviews in the future as well. So yeah, thanks for watching, stay safe, I shall see you all next time. Bye for now.